Hello there to all our viewers and welcome to Face to Face. Today's guest on our show is a very special guest, of course. He is none other than opposition leader Sajith Premadasa. Welcome to Face to Face.
Thank you for having me.
Well, if our viewers are currently wondering why the different set, why so many equipment, this is what we are here to speak about. One of the main things that we're here to speak about is the inequalities that the COVID-19 pandemic has really revealed to us, not only here in Sri Lanka, but across the world as well, but especially the inequalities present here in Sri Lanka. The COVID-19 pandemic, if we compare it to a turbulent sea, which it is currently, we are simply on a raft, and dry land is still far away. We need to get our act right if we are to ensure that more lives aren't lost to this dangerous pandemic. And who better to speak to than a person who has already been through the process of being treated for this pandemic after having fallen victim to the pandemic and being one of the lucky people to make it through. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, since the day you contracted COVID-19, how has your journey been since then?
Well, I was an asymptomatic patient, and it was my wife who was admitted for having the COVID virus after it was revealed after the conclusion of several tests. Well, the whole experience was somewhat scary. But it also opened new horizons in the sense I basically fell into the shoes of hundreds of thousands of people who have been infected by this virus. And during my stay in hospital, basically I was able to come to various understandings and conclusions about the people who were infected by COVID and how they felt, what their mentality was, what their psyche was, and so on and so forth. And most important, during my days in hospital, when the curative process was taking place and I was recovering, I spent all of my time in raising funds, raising funds for the HUSMA program. That's right, a breath of fresh air from the opposition, which basically encapsulates provision of life-saving medical equipment, such as what we have here. If I may just quickly describe, these are the oxygen nasal cannulas, oxygen masks, non-breathing masks, high-flow oxygen machine, the CPAP and the BiPAP, and you have the ICU ventilator. So these are the types of equipment that are indispensable in saving people's lives. So I'm enthusiastic and energized now in the post-COVID time period to spend my time to use all the energies available, whatever I have, mobilize all my strengths to ensure that through the medical equipment program, which we have done about 15 rounds, and we have distributed medical equipment worth 45.5 million so far, that the hospital sector, the health sector, which has a scarcity in life-saving equipment.
So these are just a few pieces of equipment that are needed to save lives.
That's what I believe, and our program is aimed towards addressing the scarcities and the deficiencies in life-saving equipment within the Sri Lankan governmental hospital structure.
Opposition Leader
and trying to address
Premadasa,
that
now we saw even the State Minister of COVID-19 prevention, responsible for COVID-19 prevention, coming out and saying, look, we're having a lack of equipment. We don't have proper equipment, enough equipment at least, in our hospitals to treat these COVID-19 patients, to save their lives. She asked private donors to come forward and help. You, having gone through the entire process, being in hospital, being treated with these very same equipment, how bad is this scarcity?
Well, if one does a survey of the hospital system and the hospital structure in our country, there are glaring weaknesses and deficiencies, especially in terms of doctors and medical personnel not having access to life-saving equipment. So it is incumbent upon us as members of civil society and also being a responsible opposition, rather than following the same old way of behaving as an opposition. Ever since independence, most opposition groups and parties have always, their job has been to criticize
And
up
oppose the
until they assume the mantle of governmental power. Whereas we as an opposition, the SJB, we will provide constructive opposition, constructive criticism, but while at the same time, we in fact have embarked on a revolution. And this revolution is that the opposition, just because it does not have government patronage and government funding, we don't sit on our laurels and just basically dream about coming into power, but rather we have gone beyond the traditional framework of political operations, and we have gone beyond the framework, and we are making a unique attempt to raise funds to provide the best equipment possible, equipment that has the best brand names, that has the best performance capabilities, in order to ensure that we add value to our health system, and more important, it's very important, save lives, protect the lives of Sri Lankan people.
With these statements that you just made on what your party plans on doing as an opposition, we saw this in practice. We saw you personally going and meeting with ambassadors of certain foreign nations to appeal to them and ask them for much needed vaccines here in Sri Lanka. There are many people who have received their first dose of the vaccine, not received their second dose. There are still many people who haven't received a single jab of the vaccine, myself included. But there is an accusation against you, Mr. Premadasa, because when the parliament or all parliamentarians were offered the vaccine, you opted not to take the vaccine. There were people who were critical about this point. They were of the opinion that if you had taken the vaccine, that would have given more assurance to the general public to take the vaccine, and also you would have not contracted this virus and have to go through that process. What do you have to say to your critics on that?
Well, with your permission, I would like to answer your question in 4 parts. First, you expressed the fact that we met with foreign diplomatic representatives and dignitaries. Yes, I did meet them. And the message that I conveyed to them was that there was an urgent necessity, and it is still there right now, for vaccinating Sri Lankan people. Still, the government has not been able to obtain the requisite number of vaccines for Sri Lankan people. So, as a responsible opposition, my sole job or duty is not just to criticize the government, but rather active in a proactive and constructive, progressive manner, approach the diplomatic representatives and try to use my powers of persuasion, whatever skills and capabilities that I may possess in the diplomatic and international arena, to try and encourage those countries to provide vaccines to Sri Lanka. So that's point one. Second is the vaccination strategy of the present administration leaves a lot to be desired. Do you know, most countries have a vaccination protocol. So Sri Lanka does not have a proper vaccination protocol, and
But we do
one
do
fine
have
day,
one on paper, don't we?
one fine day, when I was in Parliament, all of a sudden, all parliamentarians are in the process of getting an SMS. So that SMS virtually prioritized parliamentarians as the number one category for the vaccination. And I'm sorry to say, I'm actually ashamed of that. It was a shameful act by the present administration. We are not the priority. The priority are the frontline health workers. The priority are the security forces. The priority are the medical personnel, the elderly, the destitute, the poor, the disabled, those who have issues with comorbidities, people suffering from diabetes, heart issues, lung issues, kidney issues, liver issues, so on and so forth. They should have been given the priority. But here we have a highly jovial situation in our country. No vaccine protocol, absolutely no proper structure for the vaccination process to take place. And they are commencing this process with minuscule numbers of vaccines. How dare they do that? How can you prioritize politicians before the citizens of the country? So, okay, there may be people who have criticized and who are still criticizing me. They are free to criticize. But all I can say is, as once one of the US presidents stated, read my lips, I will not take the vaccine until the vast majority of the targeted population, which the government says something like 15, 16 million, until all those are vaccinated, please read my lips, I will not be vaccinated and I will not take the vaccination. And also for those critics, I would like to mention the fact, just look at the manner in which the New Zealand Prime Minister has behaved. The New Zealand vaccination process commenced sometime in February. They have a vaccination protocol, Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4. They have categorized it. And you have Jacinda Ardern taking the vaccine, I believe, yesterday or day before, as it was reported in the media.
A few days ago.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister was not the first to take. She undertook to be guided by the protocol, the vaccine protocol. So you are asking me as a politician who has made speeches on stage saying, people will be my priority, country will be my priority, people will be looked after before I am looked after. And you are telling me to run to the army hospital and get the vaccine right at the top of the ladder. I'm sorry, Premadasas don't do that.
Well, maybe we have been convinced otherwise by the conduct of the vast majority of politicians here in Sri Lanka. But however, you have set your example. There are those who think otherwise, but you have made a decision not to take the vaccine until the vast population of Sri Lanka has already been vaccinated. However, as I mentioned at the beginning, you, sir, and your wife were one of the lucky people to have come out of it, to have survived. There are many others who were not that lucky, who lost their lives, who suffered many other complications. But the COVID-19 pandemic is not just attacking us on one front. It's not only the health system that it is attacking. It is leaving people in hunger because of the travel restrictions that have been imposed. Now, while travel restrictions are an important part in containing the virus, we need to, of course, take care of the people's basic needs, like food and shelter. In these trying times where a vast majority of Sri Lanka's population, maybe not in Colombo, but in other areas as well, are suffering because they don't have 3 meals a day, what do you believe the responsibility is? I would generally say the government, but that would make it political. So what do you believe the responsibility of the general public of Sri Lanka is on this matter?
Well, I think the prime responsibility lies with the government. The government cannot shy away from its bounden duty.
Even if they don't have money?
Moral, legal, ethical, no money?
No
we have
funds?
to ask the question, where did the money go? The money was siphoned off through tax cuts, through various other relief that were given to the rich and famous of this country. So the government, through its own actions, reduced state revenue, and now they are in a fix in terms of state revenue. So basically, right now, I would prioritize the hospital equipment program purely because right to life is a human right. It's not a privilege. It's a right. It's part of a human and fundamental right. And this right the government has to protect. And I would like to appeal to the haves in our society, the rich and the famous and those who have accumulated a lot through the free market system, through the free interplay of supply and demand. Do remember there is a social responsibility component. It is your bounden duty to contribute as much as possible to ensure that our health system is enhanced, that we have our BiPAP, CPAP machines, that we have our ventilators, that we have our high flow oxygen machines, and all the other life-saving equipment that the hospital system and structure needs. As far as people living in hunger, unfortunately, the inefficient, inefficacious, incompetent administration, through their own policies, have perpetuated poverty, have perpetuated hunger. For example, the sudden conversion from chemical fertilizer to more upgraded
Organic fertilizer.
Organic fertilizer, mainly consisting of compost, carbonic fertilizer. Now, these kind of changes have to be done in a gradual manner. Look at the impact on national food production,
Food security.
food security, and food safety, access to food. Basically, the governmental policy will lead to a complete famine, a 35 to 40% reduction in national food production. And do you know that countries that are hell bent on using organic fertilizer, the maximum they have been able to produce for the national demand for organic fertilizer, countries such as Austria, they are only producing 16%. So, when Austria produces 16%, are you telling me that Sri Lanka can fulfill our fertilizer requirement by 100% in the organic sector? What nonsense! So, I am afraid I have to say, okay, we have an elected government in name, but there is anarchy in the country. The rule of law is not prevailing. So, if people out of the pressures and out of the various constraints, when people are strangled, they have no way of expressing their opinions. Soon as you get onto the street and express your opinion, you're arrested.
You can't even do it on social media.
No
Still
way.
arrested.
That's completely and utterly prohibited. This fake news topic is just a one-way street. It's arbitrarily implemented. So basically what we have right now is incompetence reigning in our country. And I'm afraid I don't want to make this discussion political. All I would urge people in our society is, especially the well-off, actually I'm speaking to the well-off, please contribute, please support, please help the Sri Lankan hospital system, please support the people of our country. People are suffering, people are feeling the pressure, poverty is growing. A new concept of COVID poverty has gained traction in our country. Malnutrition is taking place. Children are not receiving the required amount of staple food items in order to have a well-nourished life. Malnutrition is increasing. So it's time that those who benefited from the tax cuts, from the various perks and privileges in this hour of need, please don't hesitate to give whatever you can to help the hospital structure through instruments that will save lives.
Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, you spoke about people not being allowed to make their views known. Sri Lanka has been a democracy, at least for the past more than 70 years. People are used to expressing various views, and all governments have been accommodative of criticism in different ways during various times. However, we no longer live in an age where Sri Lanka is isolated as a country. This is the global age. The world is watching. COVID-19 has affected fundamental rights on many grounds. You spoke about the fundamental right to health that it has affected, but also on the fundamental right of free speech with the travel restrictions that have been imposed and the current developments that are taking place in the country. For example, rise in fuel prices, rise in prices of other essential goods, rise in prices of services, and also the fertilizer crisis in the country. People are wondering, how can I make my view heard? I can't go on social media. I might be arrested for sharing fake news. I can't go out on the street. There are travel restrictions. You yourself would have understood that many members of the opposition have staged protests and then been arrested for these. As the opposition, the voice of the people who are not in agreement with the government and who face this sort of criticism and persecution, what would be your advice to these people? How can they make their voices heard?
Well, I would advise the people to exercise their democratic right. Be fearless. Be forthright. Just because you get onto the streets, provided that you abide by the various COVID regulations, you're expressing your right. You're expressing your thoughts. The government cannot just act in a draconian manner. The government has to understand Sri Lanka is facing economic and social Armageddon. People are suffering, and people's voices have to be heard.
But I'm speaking in
and people's voices have to be reflected in government policy. They're totally ignoring the pressures that the people are under. The poverty-stricken people, people who cannot grow their vegetables, farmers, and various other employment groups. They are absolutely suffering, and the government cannot do anything. We have policy paralysis in our country. We have an incompetent government right now where the policy structure and the whole system is paralyzed. And in all its aspects, the government is putting the fullest burden on the people. I think first and foremost the government and the ministers should take up the burden. They should be role models. They should show the country how everyone should behave. They should become a shining example. But what do you have? You have taxpayers' funds being expended on SUVs, whereas taxpayers' funds should be expended on these life-saving medical equipment.
Thank you very much, Opposition Leader Sajith Premadasa, for joining us on Face to Face and sharing with us your experience through COVID-19 and also how Sri Lanka should be handling this pandemic. I will end Face to Face today on the same note that I began it with, saying that in this sea, this turbulent sea of COVID-19, we are merely on a raft and dry land is still far away. It's important that we learn from our mistakes in the past and set things right so that we can take this long journey towards dry land and hope that all of us, the entire country, Sri Lanka and the world of course, come out of this in one piece. Once again, thank you very much, Opposition Leader Sajith Premadasa, for joining us
having me
on Face to Face. And thank you very much to all our viewers for tuning in. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.